This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Welcome to Island Treasures, a place for caregivers to hear encouragement from other caregivers who, by sharing their experiences, offer helpful information and resources for your caregiving journey. This podcast is brought to you by Alongside Caregiver Consulting, and I am your host and caregiver consultant, Alison Van Schie from beautiful Vancouver Island in British Columbia, Canada. I was introduced to my guest today when a friend told me about her training programs and certification programs for caregiving consultants. This friend knew that was just what I needed to kickstart my caregiving consultancy work at the end of my social work career. My guest is an author, a speaker, a caregiver, a coach, and has even been named an influencer in aging. Since our initial introduction, I have found her to be a great support, a teacher, a cheerleader, facilitator of opportunities, and a friend who I'd now like to introduce you to. So join me now as I welcome the founder of the Caregiving Years Training Academy, Denise Brown. Welcome, Denise. It's so wonderful to have you as a guest on the Island Treasures podcast for caregivers.
Yeah, thank you so much, Allison. It's delightful to be with you.
So let's dive right in, if you wouldn't mind sharing your caregiving story, and then we can progress from there.
Sure. So I started helping my dad in 2004. He's now 91. Mm-hmm. I started helping my mom when she was in her early 80s in 2015. So I cared for both of them at the same time for 7 years until my mom died in August of 2022. And my dad is still living independently with help about 10 minutes from me.
Yeah, you've been caregiving a long time. But you've been caring for more than your parents. If you could share more about that.
Yeah, so when I graduated from college way back when, I was writing for trade magazines. What that meant was no one was reading what I was writing. And so that drove me nuts. And so I thought there's got to be something better out there for me. So I decided to do some freelance writing. At the time, I was living on the East Coast, not too far from New York City.
Oh.
That is the hub of freelance writing. So I was looking for some freelance writing gigs, but I wanted to have some kind of revenue stream coming in. So I started working as part-time at a senior community in a small town in New Jersey along the Delaware River. So what I did was I managed the Meals on Wheels program and the Congregate Meals program. So seniors from this little town, and it was a little town, would come for a hot meal Monday through Friday, and then we would deliver Meals on Wheels.
So that sounds lovely, and the location sounds idyllic. And that was your introduction into senior care.
Yes, so I started working with older adults, and then family members who cared for them would call me and say, did my mom come for lunch today? I did that for a summer, and then I got promoted to manage a respite care program in this same county. And then from there, I started working as admissions director for a few different nursing homes. So over a period of about 5 years, I was interacting with family caregivers every day, listening to their stories. And as a writer, their stories were so compelling to me. Mm-hmm. Every story was different. And they all had the ingredients of a good story. There was mystery, there was dysfunction, there was conflict, there was drama, there was humor. It was just great stories. So from that experience, I decided there's got to be a way to support family caregivers. So I actually started a newsletter called Caregiving And the first issue came out in January of 1995. And it was a monthly publication that I published for the next 10 years. And then around December of 1995, a friend of mine told me about this newfangled thing called the internet.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah. And I thought, well, I want to be there. So I took an online course about how to start your own website. And then I worked on starting a website. I didn't have a domain name until August of 1996. I thought there's enough traffic coming to this little site that I had developed that I need to start investing. So I got a domain name and launched really one of the very first online caregiving communities for family caregivers. And not soon after I launched, I had a visitor named Jenny who was caring for her grandmother say to me, "Can you connect me to other family caregivers?" And I thought, wow, there's got to be some way to do this. So what we did initially was basically send email messages to each other and just reply all. So when someone new was added, I just put them in the to line, and then we just kept doing reply all. And then I thought, this is getting a little cumbersome. There's got to be an easier way. So then we moved to listservs. And then years ago, the big thing was Yahoo groups. And then we used Yahoo groups for a little bit. And then I was able to actually find a chat technology. So we used a chat room, and we had chats 3 times a day, every day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you recognized a need and you just jumped on it.
Yes. And I recognize that family caregivers are the expert of their experience.
Oh, totally.
And at that time, it was all about, and I don't mean to say that there's not value in the content that they can create, but it was really about doctors, attorneys, financial planners. That's the go-to. But to me, I felt like as a family caregiver, we had a much more nuanced expertise around legal issues, managing the budget, providing care. So I really always made sure that family caregivers and their voice was first and foremost on any platform I created. So they became the bloggers on my website. I would have professionals reach out and say, I want to blog. And I would say, it's only family caregivers who could blog.
Right.
And that really developed a marketability around my work that turned out to be really helpful, because what it did is it kept me engaged in the stories with family caregivers. I wasn't just hearing about from second or third individuals about what caregiving was like. I was hearing from the source every day about what caregiving was like for them.
I love that. You're speaking my language, Denise. I always say that caregivers are the best resource for caregivers. I love hearing your story. I didn't know this background, and you progressed as the internet progressed.
Right. So I actually developed my own website. So I taught myself HTML, and then I taught myself WordPress. And I really got into the world of WordPress, which is a software you could use to launch a website. I was thinking about this the other day. I mean, I would read about WordPress every day. I would be active in communities with others who used WordPress. I just loved it for whatever reason. And I suppose really software is just a language. And I'm always fascinated by language and words. And coding was just a different way to speak a language. And I suppose that's what just drew me into learning it. Kind of had wished that I had gone into computer science when I was in school, but it wasn't something that was ever offered as an option. And everybody who I knew in college that was in computer science would say, oh my God, this is awful. This is terrible. This is just awful. I thought, well, it's awful to be involved in this kind of software. And then when I got into it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is fabulous. This is fun. And the other thing that I learned from software development is that everything starts off as a first version. It's not the last version. And that was really helpful as I started really developing training programs and other kinds of services for family caregivers. I always knew it was where I was starting, but not where I was ending. So when you work with software, you know that there's always an update. There's always a bug that they're fixing. There's always a new feature that they're adding. And that was really helpful for me when I was doing my own stuff, to really take a page out of a software developer's manual, which is you start and you put it out in the world. The only way it gets better, the only way you learn the bugs, the only way you understand the features is by having people use it. So I always put things out into the world to have people tell me what they liked, what needed to change, what needed to be improved. And that is really how things got better for me.
That's really cool. And even that builds on your first email exchange and how you developed your addresses and your contacts that you were emailing reply all to. And yeah, you just grew and grew and grew. But isn't that life though? Like we put it out there, and you are very good at helping people be brave, taking that first step. But if you never take that first step, you can't change and you can't evolve and you can't progress.
Something else that I did early on was I took risks in front of a smaller audience. Because things went awry. Things, especially with technology, when I was first learning it, things did not go well. And so I had some big blunders, but it was again in front of a smaller audience. And that helped me so that I could figure things out and know how to mitigate risks in front of a larger audience. That was helpful too. So when you start off, you do have to just put yourself out there, which is really one of the worst feelings in the world, because you feel like putting your heart onto a table and saying, judge me. And people can be judgmental and mean, and you have to learn to say, that's a judgmental, mean person. That's not my market. That's not my audience. I'm not going to listen to him or her. I'm going to really listen to the people who are my tribe, who I want to interact with, who I want to be engaged with. I want their feedback.
Vulnerability. It's a skill. It's something we have to embrace. And it's hard because it isn't comfortable.
Right. It isn't comfortable.
No.
Except we never get where we want to be if we just choose comfort. And I think of comfort in a little different way. Like there are times in life where we need something that feels comforting, which I think of as healing. And then there's also something that just keeps us in a place of less than ourselves. And sometimes if we get too comfortable in our life, then we stay less than ourselves. We want to challenge ourselves. We want to take that risk, put ourselves out there, because that's where we feel like we're going to flourish. We want to get out there, put ourselves under the spotlight, because that's where the flourishing can happen.
So did you ever envision that this is where your adventures would take you when you first started with the Meals on Wheels?
Okay, well, so here's the story about that. I was looking for a part-time job. And at that time, now this is pre-internet, so I had the want ads open. And I remember laying on my bedroom floor, the want ads for the local newspaper spread out in front of me, looking, where's the job? Where's the job? And honestly, it was like a flashlight just shown on this ad for a part-time manager of a congregate meal site. Now, I'd never worked with older adults. I'd never worked in social service. I didn't have any of the skills, really, you could say, but it was like I couldn't stop thinking about it. So it was like a flashlight moment. And I told myself, okay, go to bed. And if you wake up thinking about this, then call. And I woke up thinking about it. And so I called. So I knew that there was something to this. And then as I continued to work with family caregivers and started launching different programs and products and my website, I had this idea around how can we stage the caregiving experience. And so in 1997, I started thinking through what are the stages we go through when we're caring for someone. It's not about the caree, but it's about us. What's our experience? And I came up with 4 initial stages. And then in 1998, I thought, okay, there's 2 more.
Yeah.
And when I started really working at it, I developed it into a book, and I had my dad actually be my editor and read it. And I remember saying to him, Dad, this is the most important work I'll do in my life.
Oh. And he was a part of it. Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah. My mom was always my editor too. She would proofread for me.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So you wrote the book. That was just your first book.
Yes.
Yeah. You've written more.
Yes. Yeah.
And you're a real champion for caregivers. And let's talk a wee little bit more about your caregiving, your hands-on though with your dad now, since your mom passed away, and I am really sorry about that. And you've had some other difficult losses in your life as well. But with your dad, you talk about just vulnerability for him, but you're very caring for him. And do you just want to talk a little bit more about the type of things you do for your dad?
So I would say right now, I split responsibilities with my sister. My sister actually left the workforce to be my parents' family caregiver 3 days a week after my brother died. So my brother died suddenly in August of 2021. My sister at the time was working full-time as a teacher in a daycare center, and she couldn't leave work. I was trying to reach her. I couldn't get a hold of her. I got a hold of her husband, who got a hold of her. She alerted her administrative staff that she needed to leave, and they just were so unhelpful about getting her out of work so she could come to be with me and my other brother with our parents. And so by the time she got to my parents' apartment, I had already told my parents, my brother was already there, and she was a mess from everything. And she said, I cannot go back there. Yeah. And my mom said, okay, we'll just hire you. So she has been helping 3 days a week since then. It's been awesome. And my parents replaced her salary.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Wasn't a hardship on her. Yeah. It wasn't a hardship on her to actually start to help. So it's been really great for me because it always just was on me. I was the one that was closest. And obviously everybody in the family looks to me as, well, isn't this your career? You should.
Aren't you a guru of this? Yeah.
Right. And I will say, as you know, that it is different when it's you personally. Yeah. It's just different. But it's nice to have her help. So she provides care for him 3 days a week. And then I check in with him every day. And then I'm her backup. And then I provide other help and support for him. My brother is the one that manages the money. And that's helpful too. So everybody plays their part. Everybody has a role. And I always thought that was very important. Like I could have been a control freak about all this and said, I know how to do it best. I'm going to do it all. But why would I do that? Because that's then my whole life. I love to work. I love to be productive. I love to create. I love to have my own business. That was always a priority for me. So the more help I had, the more time I had for the things in life that are important for me.
I think that's so cool to have that supportive team and that your family is willing to work together to support your dad now. And he's their dad too. So it's very lovely that you can have that supportive team.
Now, we do have an older sister who is not in the picture. She lives in the area and she's just difficult to work with. So we don't work with her anymore. We did what we could with her for as long as we could. And then it just was apparent that it wasn't going to work. It was just heartbreaking for my mom. It caused a lot of really challenging situations, really difficult moments, especially during my mom's last week. My sister was really a nightmare. And we figured it out. And we figured it out in a way that I don't think it impacted my mom, but it impacted my dad. It impacted my sister, my brother, and I. What can you do, right? Yeah. So we know who she is. We've known who she is for decades. We did what we could to manage her dysfunction. The dysfunction became too much for us to manage and caused hardship for us. And the challenge was my mom always wanted her to be in the fold.
Oh, of course, she's a mother.
Of course, right? So it was very difficult for my mom to see the family splintered. And then after my brother died unexpectedly, it was very difficult for my mom because it was the loss of a son and yet the loss of a daughter who was still alive.
Right.
And she did what she could to bring my sister back in the fold, but my sister is just very dysfunctional, so it didn't work.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you know, we have a team, but it's not a team of everyone. It's a team that works for us.
And you set boundaries. You knew that it wasn't going to work for your other sister to be involved, and to keep trying when it's not going to net any positive results is exhausting and it's very disappointing.
Yeah, my mom wanted us to keep trying and we respected that. We wanted to be in a place of support for my mom around this. And we did what we could to support my mom. And towards the end, my mom was very resistant to dying until the last 10 days of her life where she was like, oh, I really get where this is going. And then everything changed for her. And so the last week of her life, I spent really creating connections for her. So she would wake up in the morning and say to me, what's on the agenda today? And I would tell her who's going to call, who's going to visit. And one of the things that we worked out was, what are we going to do about my older sister? And so my mom and I talked about it. We talked about it with one of my cousins during a visit that she had with my mom. And my mom talked about it with the parish priest. So when my mom was dying, we had the priest come. They used to call it last rites, but now they call it the anointing of the sick. And then she had her last confession with the priest in private, but then she told us later what she talked about with the priest. And it was trying to figure out how do we reconcile this situation with my older sister. And what we finally decided to do was have my mom tell me what she wanted to write in a card. My mom always had cards ready to send out. So we picked out a card from her stash. She told me what to write. And then I had her sign it. She could barely sign, but she did sign it. And that really brought peace to my mom because she was able to say nice things to my sister. We were able to involve my sister without having my sister present. So that was the week before my mom died. And then 2 days before my mom died, my sister started reaching out. I heard mom's dying. Why aren't you reaching out to me? Oh my gosh, it was really just terrible. But we figured out a way to say to her, come see her, come visit her. You are welcome anytime. And she didn't come. She didn't come. And then when it was the funeral, she showed up after the funeral started and then left before the funeral ended.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's tough.
But we figured it out. We figured it out. We made it through, and we all feel good about how we made decisions, the actions that we took, and then how we interacted with my mom around it. We were very kind and compassionate.
I think you were kind and compassionate to your sister too. Like, come. And she did come. You know, she came within her own restrictive boundaries, but she did come. You know, she has to live with that.
Yes, absolutely. And so we always just kind of left it up that she's got to manage the impact of her decisions herself. It's not for us to take on.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you. Yeah. So Denise, I'd love for you to share more about what you do now with the Caregiving Years Training Academy and how you've just built so much, and you share so much of your wisdom and your creativity. I've always marveled at your creativity. So please share about what you do now.
So I'm actually going to go back in time a little bit to 2015. So interestingly enough, my dad and my mom are critically ill at the same time in the summer of 2015. And I'm also working other jobs to keep my business going. I still hadn't figured out the revenue stream, so it was a little stressful. So my mom was hospitalized. My dad was up all night recovering from his own surgeries, and I was living with them and helping my dad. So I'd been up all night with my dad. And then at the time I was working as a nanny. So then I went to take care of 2 little kids and I was exhausted. So I was laying on the couch while they were at school and someone called me and I picked up my phone and it was someone who had been to the website and said, I want you to teach me how to deliver the 6 caregiving stages as a workshop. Now I had tried to do this probably 10 years earlier, and I just hadn't figured out a way to have people feel comfortable delivering the content. And so she walked me through what she would love for me to create that she could buy. I mean, what a gift.
Yeah.
And that was Sarah Beth, who actually became one of our very first certified caregiving consultants. So I would touch base with her and say, this is what I think I'm going to develop. Does this sound like something that you want? So what I created was a coaching program, really, based on tools I had learned when I went through life coach training in 2004. And then I added in my own insights and concepts around the family caregiver experience. So the certified caregiving consultant training equipped former family caregivers with coaching skills so that they could start their own business. And then I added in the second level, which was the educator training. So if you wanted to take the 6 caregiving stages out into the community and deliver it as a workshop or as a presentation during a conference, you could do it. So the consultant training provided really this foundation so that you felt comfortable sharing the content. So then I launched it in January of 2016. and have continued to provide that training then for the past,
7 years.
Yeah, 7.5 years. And what's interesting is I just revised the program again. When I first launched the program, I was approved to provide continuing ed hours for professionals like nurses and social workers. And when I first launched it, I had 8 hours of continuing ed hours I could offer. And I just updated the program, so now it's 75 hours.
Wow.
I know. Can you believe that?
No, that's awesome.
Yeah. So what I just added is budget planning, because we think about a budget for caregiving as one pool of one bucket of money, when really we need to think about it as different buckets. And then how do we budget appropriately for the caree and the family caregiver? So financial planning tools are included now, and conflict resolution.
Oh.
So I just shared about my sister, right? So we've been managing, honestly, I started managing conflicts in my family when I was in high school. So I've been managing conflicts within the family for decades. Most with my older sister, but some other family members, including my grandmother.
Mm.
So, and then I've had other conflicts within my professional life. So I used to get so upset about these disputes that I had, because I kept thinking, why am I having these disputes and conflicts that really were difficult, just stressful? A couple weeks ago, I was giving a presentation to the financial planners around financial planning. That's actually where I pulled the content that I added in the consultant training. So I talked about 3 ways we can plan to help family caregivers manage challenges. We opened up to the audience, financial planners, after my formal presentation for questions, and someone said, okay, this is all well and good about planning, but what happens when there's a dispute? I thought, oh my gosh, you know what we need? We need a plan to manage disputes.
We do.
If you are in a legal agreement with someone, within that contract is how we're going to manage disputes. I thought, oh my gosh, we need to talk out how we're going to manage disputes, because disputes are going to happen in a caregiving situation.
Oh, they do.
Right? So let's talk it out. And then, in addition to a plan about how we're going to manage future disputes, let's also create a plan when the dispute happens. Typically, there's one person who might be in the middle of these disputes, trying to figure it out. There's an impact on them during the disputes. Mm-hmm. So the other piece of this is, how do you manage the impact on you? So I think about a family system having a dispute, but then also gathering for an event like a holiday or a wedding or a funeral. And we always talked it out. What are we going to do about my older sister when she shows up at the funeral, when it's the holiday? You have to think through too the impact. And if you're that individual in the family who has a tendency to manage the conflicts, it can be a very lonely experience. So we want to figure out, how do we support you and the impact? How do we help you figure out what's right for you on social media? Who do you block, right? I mean, we oftentimes are figuring out, should I block someone? And it's nice to just talk it out with someone and say, I think I'm going to unfriend my sibling. I just want to make sure that this is the right thing to do. And it seems like such a simple decision, of course, but you feel like there's
repercussions.
Something about it is intense.
Yeah.
And so it's helpful to have someone with that intensity. I also think those kinds of decisions, sometimes we have to sit with. Well, I know that's an option. I know I could do it. I don't know if I can do it today. And it's nice to have someone say, okay, it doesn't have to be today. It just has to be on the day that works for you.
Yeah.
So that's part of conflict resolution. That's now part of the consultant training. I also have pulled that out. So if you're a financial planner, you could offer that. You could provide that kind of service. If you work in a nonprofit that serves family caregivers, you could also be a conflict resolution strategist to help family caregivers when there's a conflict.
Isn't this amazing how it's progressed, though? From Sarah Beth just asking you to deliver this. How do I deliver this? And then helping you create the course.
And I've always thought there's no more content I can add to this. And
There is.
then I'm like, oh my gosh, there's content I can add to this. And honestly, I do tell myself, no more. At least for this year, no more, no more. So I do try to just wait until the spring to add in new content. And that's when I update it.
Yeah. Well, 75 continuing education units. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I feel good about that too. Yes. Yeah. But I also think that's about how complex and complicated the caregiving experience is. Oftentimes people will just, I think, really speak to the surface of it. And it doesn't really speak to the guts of it because it is complicated and complex, which is why we need professionals who work with us to understand that complexity. And I hope the consultant training arms anyone who wants to coach family caregivers with those strategies, tools, and insights that helps them feel confident that they do have strategies and solutions to help those family caregivers during this really complicated time.
And if I may be so bold to add that it's always from the caregiver perspective. And I think that's the ticket. That's why it works. Like you said earlier, you're not coming in as an outside expert. The caregiver is the expert. And that's very social worky as well.
Yes, and it's life coachy too, right? So I went to life coach training in 2004 because I was doing all these online support groups and interacting with individuals who I know were going through some of the worst times of their life. And I really wanted to feel like I had the skills to support them. And I thought about social work, nurse, and life coaching was pretty new at that time. And I just so happened to see somewhere I must have been in the newspaper, a little ad that they were doing an introductory workshop around what life coach training is. And I thought, well, I'll just explore that. And when I heard about it and I looked at the curriculum and I knew the timeline, it was 6 months. I thought I can do this and it will be just what I need to support family caregivers.
And it was.
Yeah, and it was, right? And it is very much of the client, the family caregiver knows the solution. And what we're doing as consultants and coaches is really creating this safe space for a family caregiver to talk honestly so that they can hear their own solution.
Exactly.
Oftentimes, it's just the noise of the stress that keeps us from knowing what's the right next step.
I love that. The noise of the stress.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it could be stress from situations, stress from relationships, stress from worries. So there's a variety of stresses that cause that noise.
Yeah, I really like that. I'm gonna ponder that a little bit more. So Denise, as a caregiver for your dad now, and also the caregiver that cares for all of the caregivers out there, how do you care for yourself?
Yeah, so self-care during caregiving is very different. And it depends on what's happening in my caregiving day. So I used to think about the stressful times and what I did for myself when it was really stressful. And I watched Law and Order. And the reason I did that is because there was a beginning and an ending. And typically the good guys won. So I needed to know that the fight was possible. And the fight for the good guys was worth fighting. And I would think about how I would just lay and watch Law and Order reruns. And I would think, well, why didn't I go for a walk? And then I thought, well, I had just been running through the hospital hallways or running in the house or running up and down the stairs. My body was tired. I couldn't go for a walk. I think sometimes we judge ourselves for not being more active or going to the gym, when really there are times during our caregiving experience where we're incredibly active because of what we're doing. And what we need instead is to relax, to enjoy a distraction, to connect to hope. So Law and Order, for whatever reason, was hope for me. So the other times when I feel like I have the energy, I swim, walk. Those are the two big things for me. I do like to spend time with my younger sister and my brother, and I do like to spend time with friends. And I have two friends in particular that I will make sure to connect with regularly. One friend I'll meet for breakfast on Sunday mornings. And she has become a dear friend because she had an unexpected caregiving situation in her family. And so we really talked honestly about what caregiving was like. And it was really helpful. And she would not have been someone, because she was young when caregiving started for her. So it wasn't someone that I thought, oh, she'll have a caregiving experience, we'll be able to connect that way. It became how our connection increased, which really was quite lovely to have someone who was going through something very similar. Her mom died a year before my mom, but we were really helping our moms at the end of life at the same time. So the socialization is important. I also think being out in nature is important. And then I do like to have, I guess you would call them strategy sessions, talk out ideas, think about what's possible, consider what could be next in terms of a business idea or a business opportunity. I like to strategize. That is a way for me to take care of myself too.
I'm glad you know that about yourself, because I marvel at your creativity.
I took Gallup's Strengths Finder assessment in 2013, I think. And one of my strengths was strategy. So I remember that all the time. And I thought, oh, that's so interesting. We actually have that assessment as part of one of our consultant levels. So if you buy up into our silver level, you get the assessment, and then you actually get a coaching session with one of our consultants who actually is trained on helping you figure out what the assessment means. And I think when you're looking at starting a business, it's very intimidating. And it's very helpful if you remember what your strengths are and to follow your strengths, and not to try to turn a weakness into a strength, but to leave your weaknesses alone so that you can focus on your strengths and then use your strengths to find your success.
Well said. Knowing what your strengths are is wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, I know for me, it was very useful to start my business, having the connection with you and just growing with you and through you and learning from you. So I thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome.
It's been good. Very good. So Denise, are you working on anything new within caregiving right now that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I am really focused on the 17 caregiving systems. So system navigation is something that we know about. We know that we navigate different systems during our caregiving experience. And typically we think about the healthcare system and the medical system and maybe the provider system. So in the consultant training, I included system navigation as part of what we train on. And when I first added it into the training, it was 5 or 6 systems that I mentioned on a slide. And then I would ask the training program participants, what's a system I missed? And Brianna, who cares for her son, said, nervous system. And I was like, oh my God, that's so obvious. How did I miss that? So then I would continue to ask training program participants about this slide and what was missing. And it made me listen to the stories that family caregivers were telling in a different way. And then I connected to a mom who's caring for her son who has special needs. And she talked about how hard it is to navigate the educational system. And after that call, which was in the fall of 2022, I started to think, I'm missing systems when I talk about all the systems we navigate. So I sat down and I started writing them out. And the first time I wrote them out, I thought, okay, there's 13. And I thought, you know what? I think there's more than that. And then I came up with 15. And then I thought, you know what, I'm missing some. And then I came up with 17. And then I said, stop. And the truth is there are 17 systems that we navigate. And within one situation, you might navigate 5 or 6 different systems, which is why caregiving is so complex and complicated. So recently I was part of a program that will be broadcast on PBS stations in the fall of 2023 and in the winter of 2023. And it was a focus on mental well-being. And it was lived experiences that were highlighted. So individuals who sought out mental health treatments or who cared for a family member who needs mental health treatments talked about their experiences. So one of the panelists, Margaret, cares for her daughter. And she shared the experience of what it was like to try to get her daughter help. And she actually had to navigate 12 different systems just to start services,
Yeah.
So knowing all these systems that we navigate changes how we hear a family caregiver's story. And it helps us hear the complexity. It's important that we collect stories of what it's like to navigate these systems. So we've started collecting stories. So any of your listeners who would like to share a story about what it's like to navigate, please reach out to me because we want to hear your story. We can record it for the public or just record it for our own internal use or not record it at all. It's really up to you as to what your comfort level is. But it's so helpful because there's pieces that come out when we share the stories that can inspire interventions that could help. So for instance, one family caregiver shared a story about her husband's hospitalization. Now, her husband is a lung transplant survivor. And then he had the bad luck of getting into an accident when he was riding on his Vespa. He was hit by a car. So they had this medical emergency that was not related to his lung transplant, but his lung transplant made that accident that much more complicated as a medical crisis. So her husband is in the emergency room. She arrives to provide support and help and advocate for him. And she is devastated by this. And so she has to step outside of the emergency room cubby and go into a stairwell to cry.
Oh.
So she's crying in this stairwell, and it's a parade of people who pass by her. No one stops for a good 5 minutes until finally a doctor, not her husband's doctor, just a doctor, takes her aside and offers her some comfort and support. And then she's able to go back. But she saw everybody walk by her and no one stopped to help because they're probably thinking, I don't have time and I don't have the skills. I don't know how to help this person. But yet we could really think about an intervention in the emergency room for a family caregiver that could be helpful. So just hearing these conversations helps me think, what's the intervention we need within each system that could be helpful for family caregivers? So that's why it's so important for you to share a story. So again, if you're interested, I'd love to hear a story about how you navigate multiple systems within a day or a situation or an experience.
Yeah, and learning from your story is going to impact other caregivers.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I'm confident that Denise will run with it and make something great out of it. So
yes, because I've already thought of an intervention for the ER that we're going to start working on this summer. So I'll keep everybody posted.
Well, this kind of reminds me of the family emergency planning sessions that I've been a part of that you created, because making a plan for the what ifs is so important when you're not in crisis. And
yes,
would you care to talk briefly about the family emergency planning session?
Yeah. Well, so we have these worries, right? We worries about the what ifs because we know once one crisis has happened, we know that a crisis could happen again. So we're not borrowing trouble with these worries. We're being realistic about someone's medical situation in our family that's fragile, uncertain, not necessarily stable. So things could happen and we're trying to figure out what do we do about it. And so instead of fretting, what we do in our family emergency planning is actually talk it out. What if there's a weather emergency? What if the home health aide is late? What if we have a deadline at work that we must meet? How do we manage that so we're taken care of, our caree is taken care of, and the situation is taken care of?
And a lot of the heaviness is lifted. So those sessions are once a month on the fourth Friday of every
Yes.
month.
The fourth Friday, yep, at 1 p.m. Eastern time. And you can join us anytime. You could join us every month if you wanted to. They're free. We have a guide that's available that has our plan, and that's free too. And it's just really thinking through the what ifs so that you don't feel oppressed by the worry, that you feel released with a plan, because every worry needs a plan.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. So Denise, how can folks reach you to get connected with all of these programs?
So you can go to my website, which is careyearsacademy.com. Again, it's careyearsacademy.com. The name of my company is the Caregiving Years Training Academy. We also have a community of support. You're welcome to join us there. You can register to join us for workshops and events and connect with us to tell us how you're doing. And that community is called Caring Our Way. And you can go to caringourway.com to join us.
Thank you. That's awesome. So is there a tidbit that you would be willing to share with the listeners about yourself? A fun fact.
A fun fact. I once rode my bike for 100 miles over 2 days from downtown Chicago to Michigan. It was fabulous.
Were you alone or were you with a group?
I was part of a group. I went by myself, but I went with a group, and we stayed overnight at the midway point and then finished up the next day. It was fun. It was fun.
Wow, that's incredible. And did you have to ride back or was there transportation back?
So what I did actually was, once we got to Michigan, I stayed a couple extra nights and I just took the train home with my bike.
Oh, fun. Yeah, that is a fun fact. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so that's great. I do encourage folks to reach out to you, Denise. You have been a great support for me and a great leader. So I just thank you. And I thank you for sharing things today that I knew nothing about. So
yes, well, you're a great interviewer. So thank you for creating the space for me to tell the truth about my story. And thanks for all you do, Allison. Thanks for everything.
Likewise, ditto, echo, all that. But you're right, though. Caregivers need to tell their stories. And in those stories, we can learn so much. And no one's story is the same as someone else's.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, thanks, Denise.
Thanks, Allison.
Caregiving stories need to be shared, and I thank Denise for sharing hers. From that first moment, when Denise recognized there had to be a way to support family caregivers, she has been creating opportunities to provide that support, first with a newsletter, then facilitating chats, and as time progressed, she created the Caregiving Years Training Academy. And the courses the Academy offers continue to expand to meet the needs of caregivers, including the most recent additions of budget planning, conflict resolution, and systems navigation. You're welcome to check it out at thecareyearsacademy.com. And if you'd like to participate in the community of support for caregivers, visit joincaregivingourway.com. And if you'd like to share your story about how you navigate multiple systems, you can contact Denise at careyearsacademy.com. And be sure to watch for the program coming this fall that Denise will be participating in. It's called Coming to Light, A Path to Mental Health Services for All, a program hosted by the Kennedy Forum. And if you're in the midst of your own caregiving journey and need some supports, I invite you to tap into Alongside CaregiverConsulting.ca or Alongside Caregiver Consulting's Facebook page or Instagram account. And if you'd like to share your story as a guest on the Island Treasures podcast, please contact me by email through the contact button on my website or at Alongside Caregiver Consulting at shaw.ca. And thank you for tuning in today, and to Denise Brown for sharing your caregiving story, your strategies, and insights to help equip family caregivers. If you don't want to miss future episodes, be sure to subscribe to the Island Treasures podcasts. See you next episode.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.